Hi, my name is Shalottie Mosley, and I'm going to speak about interpersonal communication for HSER 508 at Liberty University. Introduction. John Stewart states communication and communicating as a continuous, complex, collaborative process of verbal and nonverbal, meaning making. A general process that we use to communicate our ideas, thoughts, and feelings to another person. Our interpersonal communication skills are learned behaviors that can be improved through knowledge, practice, feedback, and reflection. Next slide. In introduction, there is a two-step process that envelopes what we take in, inhale, and give out, exhale. Listening is a learned skill that is done differently per person. Listening effectively involves turning into ourselves and turning in to others. Next slide. One-way versus two-way communications. One-way communication, a person sends a message to another person, and no questions, feedback, or interaction follow. This is good for giving simple directions. Two-way communication, on the other hand, the communicator and receiver interact. This process is good for solving problems or problem solving. Next slide. There are four types of listening: passive, competitive, active, and reflective. Next slide. Passive listening is equivalent to not listening to what is being said. When you don't concentrate on what someone else is saying, it is impossible to make out the subtle emotional variations in what they express. Although this is alright in some situations, it is dangerous when something important is being communicated. Next slide. Competitive listening is not listening closely, listen to only enough information, interrupting conversation, and thinking ahead of the communicator. Next slide. Active listening, that is fully concentrating on what is being said rather than just hearing the message of the speaker, involves listening with all senses, as well as giving full attention to the speaker. It is important that the active listener is also seen to be listening to them. Otherwise, the speaker may conclude that what they are talking about is uninteresting to the listener. Interest can be conveyed to the speaker by using both verbal and nonverbal messages, such as maintaining eye contact, nodding your head, smiling, or agreeing by saying yes, encouraging them to continue. By providing this feedback, the person speaking will usually feel more at ease and therefore communicate more easily, openly, and honestly. Next slide. Reflective listening, the skill of listening carefully to another person and repeating back to the speaker the heard message to correct any inaccuracies or misunderstandings. Next slide. Reflective listening emphasizes the receiver's role, helps the receiver and communicator clearly and fully understand the message sent, and is useful in problem solving. Next slide. Noise pollutions. Noise is a barrier that prevents people from listening to messages. Internal noise includes things that are going on inside us that distract us from communicating. Those things include mental struggles, personal beliefs and values, stereotypes, daydreaming, rehearsing what to say next, and identifying with what the talker is saying. External noise includes anything that makes it difficult to hear and pay attention to a speaker, such as sirens blaring outside of a window, other people talking, and dogs barking. Listeners may also get distracted by internal noise, which is anything they may be thinking about that prevents them from listening. Next slide. Enlarging the conversation. Enlarging the conversation makes us actively engage in something new by changing our way of thinking and communicating. True listening builds teamwork, trust, and of belonging to a group. Next slide. Barriers to communication. The use of jargon, overcomplicated or unfamiliar terms, emotional barriers and taboos, lack of attention, interest, distractions, or irrelevance to the receiver, differences in perception and viewpoint, physical disabilities such as hearing problems or speech difficulties, physical barriers to nonverbal communication, language differences and the difficulty in understanding unfamiliar accents, expectations and prejudice which may lead to false assumptions or stereotyping. People often hear what they expect to hear rather than what is actually said and jump to incorrect conclusions. Cultural differences is another barrier of communication. Next slide. Potential barriers. As a determined doer, there are many potential barriers that I face on a daily basis. I come across as aggressive and overconfident at times, and people can be offended by my bold and direct communication. So I would need to tone it down a bit and use listening skills to enable me to expand my communication. Listening is an imperative part of the communication process. Communication is a vital part of the human experience, and any effort to improve one's skills is worthwhile. When it comes to listening, I will have to focus on not taking on the problem and owning it. Next slide. Overarching goal. The overarching goal for me is to continue to grow and evolve as a communicator by showing more sincerity towards others. I will continue to strive to trust others with certain things and allow them a chance in my circle. I will acknowledge that my personality is for my benefit and to be a blessing to others. I will continue to be aware of my strengths and weakness and try to balance them out. Using my strengths to enlarge the conversation, I will try to allow others to give input on various tasks at hand and verbalize my thoughts more. Next slide. Behavioral blend. Behavior blend is described by Carbonell in DISC personality assessment. There are 4 types of behavior or temperament: D, I, S, and C that are blended to create a unique personality for every individual. DISC personality model. D's are dominant, directing, and decisive. I's are influenced and inspiring. S's are submissive and sensitive, and C's are critical, cautious, and competent. Next slide. Behavioral blend influence. Being an individual that was less fortunate than others and having to grow up sooner than I should have made me the individual that I am. My behavioral blend described me to the fullest, using my past as strength by putting forth my best effort and wanting everything completed to perfection drives me. Working with others that do not have the same drive as I do makes it harder to complete a task or challenge, so I prefer to work alone. The DISC model influenced me to change my routine positively by being very dominant, task-oriented, competent, steady, determined, and goal-oriented. Negatively by being non-friendly, direct, high need for perfection, not being rushed, intense, or guarded. Next slide. Plan of action. My plan of action simply involves becoming an effective listener and becoming a successful communicator. Becoming an effective listener by avoiding being too critical, trying to find solutions, and being judgmental. Being a good listener by being empathetic builds understanding and support between the talker and listener. And refraining from trying to solve the talker's problems or doing the thinking for him or her. This is my presentation on interpersonal communication.